we will see about the Epidemiology, Chapter 2, Natural History of Disease and Level of Prevention. So this is Unit 2, Natural History of Disease and Level of Prevention, lecture outline. So this is natural history of disease, stage of natural history of disease and level of prevention. This is our objectives we will cover. So now natural history of disease. Natural history of disease means the progress of disease process in an individual over time. This means this be considered under the absence of intervention. So without intervention, the natural disease process in an individual over time is called natural history of disease. The progress begins with exposure to or accumulation of factors capable of causing disease. Without medical intervention, the process ends with either recovery or disability or death. So the knowledge of the natural history of disease is important for disease prevention and control. Different stages of natural history of disease may its exposure to various risk factors, latency, biological onset of disease, induction period, clinical onset of disease, permanent damage and death. So natural recovery without intervention, so it can be occur at any stage of progression of disease. So very importantly, we do have 4 stages of natural history of disease. The first stage is stage of susceptibility or stage of pre-pathogenesis. The second one is subclinical disease stage or pre-symptomatic stage. The third one is clinical disease stage or onset of stage. The fourth one is stage of disability or death or advanced disease stage. So we will cover these 3 stages. This is very important stages in natural history of disease. So the first one is susceptibility stage. A disease does not present nor have individuals been exposed. So risk factors which assist the development of disease exist, but disease has not yet developed. That means the ground has been laid by the presence of factors that favor its occurrence. So this means that there is factors which lead to the development of the disease, but still the disease not happened. So for example, a person practicing casual and unprotected sex has high risk for getting HIV infection. So still there is no HIV infection. So an unvaccinated child is susceptible for measles. So the child is unvaccinated, he is susceptible for measles, but still measles does not happen. So the second stage is subclinical stage. The changes have occurred to lead toward illness, but disease is not yet clinically detectable. This means there is pathological change which lead to illness or disease, but still the disease is not yet clinically detectable, meaning there is no sign symptom to say something this disease. So invasion by causative agent, but people are asymptomatic, meaning there is causative agent, there is exposure to some causative agent, but it is asymptomatic, there is no sign symptoms. Early pathogenesis, pathologic change have started to occur. That can only be detected through special tests. Since there is no sign symptom happened, special tests will be used to detect the disease process. Example, detection of antibodies against HIV in apparently healthy person. So the person is healthy, but detection of antibody for HIV. The other is ova of intestinal parasite in the stool of apparently healthy children. So still in this case there is no disease happened. This stage may lead to the clinical stage or may sometimes end in recovery without development of any sign symptom, meaning this is subclinical disease stage. It may be goes to the clinical stage, or it may be recovered. It may be recovered without developing signs symptoms or going to clinical disease stage. The other is the third type of stage is clinical disease stage. This is detectable signs and symptoms of disease exist. There is sign and symptom which can be detected. So the clinical disease stage, sign and symptoms may develop. So the clinical stage of different diseases differ in duration, severity, and outcome. The outcomes of this stage may be recovery, disability, death. At clinical stage, individuals may recover from the disease or may develop disability or may go to death. For instance, let me see some diseases. For instance, if in the common cold has short and mild clinical stage. Almost everyone recovers quickly. But in the case of polio, has severe clinical stage, so many patients develop paralysis, becomes disabled for the rest of their lives. In the case of rabies, a relatively short and severe clinical stage, almost always results in death. HIV/AIDS has a relatively longer clinical stage, eventually results in death. So these diseases disability are outcome, but the clinical stage shows the severity, but shortness and length of the disease shows the duration. So different at clinical stage, different diseases have different duration, severity, and outcome, as mentioned here. The other is the stage of disability or death. This is the last or fourth stage. So the disease or health condition is fully advanced, and there is either return to health or in chronic form with disabling limitation, or still other disease end in death. So in this stage, there may be disability, there may be death, or there may be recovery. Disability is the limitation of person's activity. If a person's activity is limited in different ways, disability, we can say disability. Examples are trachoma may cause blindness. This is disability. Meningitis may result in blindness or deafness. This is disability. Even may end with death. So this is considered as stage of disability or death or recovery. When we see the figures, this is the stage of natural history of disease. First, there is stage of susceptibility here. So the second one is after exposure. There is stage of subclinical disease. In this stage, in the stage of subclinical disease, pathological changes occur here. So changes happened lead to illness or disease here in the stage of subclinical disease. So after onset of symptoms, there is a stage of clinical disease. In the clinical disease, there is sign and symptoms. So this is a time for diagnosis. That a time for identifying the disease. So onset of symptoms here. The other is the last stage of disability or death or recovery. So we do have 4 stages: 1, 2, 3, 4 stages. So this is known as the natural history of disease. The other is the second objective is the level of prevention. How to prevent one's disease. How to prevent in relation to this natural history of disease. Level of prevention. Level of disease prevention. Disease prevention means interrupting or slowing the progress of disease. That means prevention means interrupting or slowing the progress of disease process. So either interrupt or stopping the disease or progress the disease, slowing the disease progress or the disease speed. We do have 4 levels of prevention. Sometimes they are classified into 3: primary, secondary and tertiary prevention. But now we will consider 4 levels of prevention. We will add primordial prevention. So we do have 4 types of prevention. The one is primordial prevention. The second is primary prevention. The third is secondary prevention. The third is tertiary prevention. The fourth is tertiary prevention. So primordial prevention, primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. Primordial prevention consists of actions and measures that inhibit the emergence of risk factors in the form of environmental, economical, social, and behavioral conditions and cultural patterns of living. So in this case, mainly we focus on inhibiting or preventing the emergence of risk factors. Prevention of emergence or development of risk factors in the population in which they have not yet appeared. So risk factors are not yet appeared, but in addition we will prevent these risk factors will not be happened. They have not yet appeared, but we will prevent also the emergence development of risk factors for the future too. So this is primordial prevention. Main intervention in the primordial prevention is through individual or mass education. By the way, education is considered as primordial prevention because it prevents risk factors before happening. For example, many adult health problems have their own early origins in the childhood, like obesity and hypertension, because this is a time when lifestyles are formed. For instance, some individuals smoke in the childhood, so they may cause the disease at adulthood stage. Eating patterns, for obesity for instance, due to eating patterns obesity may happen, so obesity also later will happen hypertension or different disease causing. Habits of physical exercise, this is also determines the childhood period. So preventing risk factors or promoting positive lifestyle is considered as primordial prevention. So this is a very important part. The second one is primary prevention. Interventions taken before the disease is established. In the case of primary prevention, intervention should be taken before the disease is established, meaning it should be that the action is taken before the biological onset of disease. Meaning in the natural history of disease, the action must be taken in the pre-pathogenic phase of the disease. So the aim of primary prevention is to prevent healthy people from becoming sick. So, because causative agent, by the way, there is causative agent, but they are not sick. So our aim is to prevent these healthy people from becoming sick because they are exposed. So the objectives of primary prevention are: 1 is health promotion, 2 is prevention of exposure or specific protection, 3rd is preventing disease. So this is 1, 2, 3. So these 3 objectives are very important. We will see one by one with their examples. Health promotion consists of general or non-specific interventions that enhances the health and the body's ability to resist disease, either enhances the positive health or increase the body's ability to resist disease. This is a very important part of health promotion. So the measures may be providing adequate nutrition, by the way, in general, doing physical exercise, health education, and environmental sanitation are very important. So providing adequate nutrition, health counseling, providing adequate housing, health education, periodical health examinations, environmental changes, provision of safe water, sanitary latrines, insect and rodent control are measures to promote optimal level of health, that is enhances the optimal health or positive health. So as the second type of objective is prevention of exposure. This includes specific intervention to avoid exposure to certain risk factors, avoidance of risk factors which may cause disease if an individual exposed to them. For instance, if an individual has nutritional deficiency, we will give that specific nutrition for that to prevent further disease. So nutritional deficiency may cause the disease. So if exposed for this nutritional deficiency, so we will give them specific nutrients. The other is like environmental sanitation, doing vector control, occupational hazard and prevention, protection of accident. For instance, when you ride the motor bicycle, you will wear a helmet to protect head injury. For instance, if you are a smoker, to prevent carcinogenic or cancer, you will stop smoking. Avoidance of allergic material. All these are prevention of exposure or specific protection. Doing specific protection. This is the second objective. The third is the prevention of disease. This is the prevention of disease development after individual has become exposed to the disease causing factor. In this case, already the individual is exposed to the disease factor causing factors. So in this stage, our action is prevent the disease development, preventing the disease from happening. So the timing is between exposure and biological onset. That means since the individual is exposed to risk factors, we are providing an action between exposure and biological onset before developing signs and symptoms. So mostly in prevention of disease, immunization is the best intervention. In the case of active immunization, involves exposing the host to specific antigen against which it will manufacture its own antibodies after 3 weeks of interval. In the case of passive immunization, involves providing the host with antibodies necessary to fight the disease. It is commonly given after exposure. Both active and passive immunization act after exposure has been takes place. Immunization does not prevent an infectious agent from invading the immunized host, but does prevent it from establishing an infection. So this is all about the primary prevention. The third one is secondary prevention. In this case, our action is early detection and early treatment of the disease. So the action is taken after the biological onset of disease, but before permanent damage sets in, before permanent damage happened. In this case, secondary prevention. In this case, onset of disease is happened. So our aim is to stop or slow the progression of disease, so as prevent or limit permanent damage. Interventions taken after the disease is established: case finding, screening survey, selective examination like cure and preventing the spread, preventing complication and further sequelae, shorten the disability time. All these are interventions. For instance, examples for secondary prevention is early detection and treatment of breast cancer. This is because to prevent its progression to invasive stage, to more advanced stage or invasive stage, and early detection and treatment of TB and sexual transmitted disease, prevention of blindness from glaucoma. All these are examples of secondary prevention. So for this tertiary prevention, the tertiary prevention is limitation of disability and rehabilitation. In this case, an action should be taken after onset of permanent damage. In this case, already permanent damage has happened, disability has happened, but our aim is limit the disability, limit the permanent damage, and promote rehabilitation. Our objective is to prevent further disability or death. The second objective is to limit physical, psychological, social, financial impact of disability, thereby improving the quality of life. This can be done through rehabilitation. which is retaining the remaining function for maximal effectiveness, targeted towards mostly chronic diseases. Disability cannot be cured there, maybe grouped in this stage. For instance, in this stage, for instance, HIV/AIDS disease, by the way, there is no cure for HIV/AIDS. In this case, we will provide counseling for HIV patients as well as their families, with the aim of helping them find ways to relieving their mental stress, psychological impact, decrease the psychological impact or the stress, as well as giving counseling about their financial burden due to the illness. So this is tertiary prevention. For instance, we do have two actions. The one is disability limitation, the second is rehabilitation. In the case of disability limitation, maybe give training, provision of facility. Measures of prevention at this level is provision of therapeutic substances to arrest the disease, to stop the disease, or prevent, limit further progress of the disability. Rehabilitation is provision of facility, giving or providing education, providing full employment, psychological support, work therapy. All these are rehabilitation. So to see, by the way, in the case of primary prevention, we do have three objectives: health promotion, prevention of exposure, prevention of disease. An example which fulfills the three examples is breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is health promotion because of by giving nutrients, prevention of exposure because by preventing an infant from feeding with contaminated food, prevention of disease by providing antibody and white blood cell. So the three fulfills an example which fulfills the three objectives is breastfeeding. So in the case of for instance, for primary, tertiary and secondary prevention is, for instance, let me see about the vitamin A deficiency. Vitamin A deficiency may lead to blindness. So in this case, at primary prevention, we will give adequate nutrition, for instance, which have vitamin A deficiency. But if this is not fulfilled, secondary prevention will be done. So in the secondary prevention, early detection and early treatment of corneal ulcer because of vitamin A deficiency. Even if the secondary prevention is failed, there is tertiary prevention. In the case of tertiary prevention, rehabilitation will be follows. Rehabilitation means learn to do gainful work and be economically self-supportive is a tertiary prevention. So primary prevention, secondary and tertiary prevention. An example for vitamin A deficiency happened, for examples of these three prevention levels. So this is the natural history of disease. This is prevention at this stage, primary prevention will be done. In the case of subclinical disease and stage of clinical disease, secondary prevention is done. But in the case of stage of recovery, disability disease, and sometimes in the case of later stage of clinical disease, tertiary prevention will be done. For instance, primary prevention, health promotion, prevention of exposure, prevention of disease. This is a natural history of disease at exposure stage or susceptibility stage. The secondary level of prevention will be done at early detection and treatment, maybe screening, at biological onset, clinical onset. Early treatment happen on this stage. So secondary interventions happened on early detection on biological onset or clinical onset. But tertiary intervention is at permanent damage or death, meaning limitation of disability. Intervention is limitation of disability, rehabilitation. So will be happened as the third will be happened on recovery disability stage. But this one is secondary interventions happened on this secondary or on the natural history of disease on the stage of clinical disease, and subclinical disease. But in the case of susceptibility, the primary intervention will be happened. So this is all about the second chapter of epidemiology. Thank you very much for your attention. If you like the video, please subscribe, like, share and comment it. So you will, if you subscribe this video, you will receive the next videos, and also the next chapters. The next chapter, like chapter 3, will be forwarded to you. So please subscribe this video. Thank you very much for your attention once again.